Welcome to this special edition of the Old Core Show. I'm OC. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Israeli commandos boarded 6 ships of the so-called Freedom Flotilla on Monday, and on one of the ships, the pro-Palestinian protesters, who were just spoiling for a fight, got just that when 10 of their number were killed and dozens more injured when the commandos had to defend themselves with lethal force. As you can see in this video, the Israelis hadn't even touched down on the deck before they were attacked by terrorist sympathizers with iron bars, chairs, knives, stun grenades, and firebombs. The Israelis' primary weapon on this raid were paintball guns, normally used for crowd dispersal and crowd control, but during the melee, the protesters managed to get a hold of 2 of the pistols that the commandos were carrying as backup weapons and started shooting. The Israelis abandoned their less-than-lethal doctrine and opened fire with live rounds. The ships, operated by the Free Gaza Movement and the Foundation for Human Rights and Freedom and Humanitarian Relief, better known as IHH, had left waters off Turkey the day before with the stated intention of running the blockade. This is Free Gaza Movement's Audrey Bomsey.
This was not purely a humanitarian mission, although we were bringing in humanitarian aid and reconstruction aid. Its purpose was to break the siege of Gaza. You see Israeli soldiers jumping out of helicopters onto the boats shooting. There's no crossfire. Had there been crossfire at close range, some Israeli soldier would have been shot.
You know what's funny? But I don't see the commandos shooting as they're jumping out of the helicopters. What I do see are the Israelis being mercilessly beaten with chairs and iron rods. It was only when the mob managed to steal the commandos' sidearms that lethal force was used, and that is exactly what the protesters were hoping for. They wanted to be martyred. This is Israeli government spokesman Mark Regev.
Now we, every day, are sending in more than 100 trucks to the Gaza Strip with humanitarian support. On average, every week, 15,000 tons, food, medicine, energy supplies. There are no shortage of humanitarian goods in the Gaza Strip. Having said that, we were very happy that this shipment joined the aid that goes in anyway to the Gaza Strip. But they weren't interested in that. They wanted to make a political statement. They wanted violence.
And just in case you're thinking, that's just Israeli propaganda, why don't we listen to Dr. Abd al-Fattah Na'man, a lecturer in Sharia law at a university in Yemen, yet another hotbed of peace, love, and understanding, who's in Gaza supporting Hamas.
قائد الأسطول البارح يقول لن نسمح للصهاينة أن يقتربوا منا وسنقاومهم. بماذا سيقاوم؟ يعني سيقاوموهم بأظفارهم هؤلاء الذين يتمنون الشهادة في سبيل الله. يعني هم كما يطمعوا أن يصلوا إلى غزة ولكن الأخرى هي أحب إلى نفوسهم.
When I went first convoy, I wanted to be a shaheed. I wasn't that lucky. Second time, I wanted to be a shaheed. Didn't work. Third time lucky, inshallah, I'll be shaheed.
الآن نحن إما إحدى الحسنيين، إما الشهادة وإما الوصول إلى غزة.
Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon said that Israel regrets the loss of life and said Israel had informed the protesters weeks before, long before they ever left the port, that they would not be allowed to dock in Gaza and that all aid had to move through approved checkpoints.
Israel regrets any loss of life and did everything to avoid this outcome. We repeatedly called upon the organizers and all those who were associated with them through diplomatic channels and any other means we could to stop this provocation.
Mavi Marmara, you are approaching an area of hostilities, which is under a naval blockade. The Gaza area, coastal region, and Gaza harbor are closed to all maritime traffic. The Israeli government supports delivery of humanitarian supplies to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip and invites you to enter the Ashdod port. Delivery of the supplies in accordance with the authorities' regulations will be through the formal land crossings and under your observation, after which you can return to your home ports aboard the vessels on which you arrived. Negative. Our destination is Gaza.
The organizers' intent was violent, their method was violent, and the results were unfortunately violent.
We have one person has just been hit in the head by a bullet. I think he may die if he does not receive medical treatment immediately.
The Israelis did offer to let the boats dock in Ashdod, the Israeli port. After a security inspection, the aid would be allowed to go into Gaza. But no, protesters just had to make their point. They had to run the blockade, and look what happened to them. After the commandos opened fire, killing 10, wounding dozens more, the captain of the vessel appealed to the rest to lay down their arms and surrender.
We have lost the main control of the ship. Please come down and take your seats. Come down and take your seats.
From London to Turkey, the country where the flotilla originated, Muslim protesters, outraged at Israel's seizure of the ships, hit the streets by the thousands. For a time in Ankara, where diplomatic ties between the Turkish government and the government of Israel have been becoming increasingly strained over the last couple of years, the mob tried to storm the Israeli embassy, but Turkish police beat them back. Turkey's ambassador to the United Nations accused Israel of state-sponsored murder and said that Israel no longer had any legitimacy in the eyes of the international community.
Mr. President, I am distraught by the fact that the Israeli Defense Forces stormed a multinational civilian endeavor carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza in international waters. Israeli actions constitute a grave breach of international law. In simplest terms, this is tantamount to banditry and piracy. It is murder conducted by a state. It has no excuses, no justification whatsoever. A nation state that follows this path has lost its legitimacy as a respectful member of the international community.
Meanwhile, the Israelis were having a little party of their own outside the Turkish embassy in Tel Aviv, where they gathered to celebrate what they considered to be a victory in being able to maintain the blockade, and ultimately a victory over Hamas, who in 2008 lobbed over 7,000 rockets and mortar shells into Israeli civilian neighborhoods, prompting the Israelis to invade Gaza during Operation Cast Lead. That invasion killed upwards of 1,300 Palestinians. Israeli ambassador to the United States, Michael Oren, was on American television defending the actions of both Israel and the commandos, saying they did everything humanly possible to use as little force as possible while still maintaining the blockade.
But the organization that is leading that effort is an organization which the CIA has identified as closely linked to Al-Qaeda. It is an organization whose members chanted death to the Jews as they got on board these ships. And we offered to take this humanitarian aid and transfer it to Gaza. That organization turned us down. It also turned out in our effort to get humanitarian aid to Corporal Gilad Shalit, who's been in Hamas hostage taken for now 4 years without any visits from the outside world in violation of international law. They turned us down on that as well.
Let me stop.
These are not peaceful protesters. We've got about 100 truckloads of humanitarian aid going to Gaza every single day. There's no shortage of food in Gaza, no shortage of medicine in Gaza, and Israel has been easing up restrictions on building material.
Yeah. Okay, now I've given you the story from both sides of this deadly little drama, and now I'd like to add my 2 cents. Don't let your emotions distract you from the truth. They were civilians, and they were killed, and they knew that it could happen. Matter of fact, they counted on it. These protesters knew exactly what they were doing when they made the decision to run the blockade. They had been warned by the Israelis for weeks prior that they would not be allowed to bring the aid, which, by the way, is being distributed today by the IDF in Gaza. They wouldn't be able to bring it directly to Gaza by sea. They knew it would be dangerous, and they did it anyway. IHH uses naive do-gooders as human shields, hoping for them to get hurt or killed in order to sway world opinion to their cause and paint the Israelis as cold-hearted bastards. You know, it's one thing to have a bunch of little brown people get killed, but heaven forbid the blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman from the United States gets killed. Okay, now that is propaganda.
You had best unfuck yourself, or I will gouge out your eyeballs and skull fuck you!